Wonderful. So welcome and good morning to those in the Americas and good afternoon to those in Europe. I'm Susana Arellano, Sustainable Urban Development Expert of IURC North America, and I'm connecting today from New York in the US. Where are you connecting from? Please let us know in the chat. Thank you for joining us for the first webinar of our Sustainable Urban Mobility and Transport series. In this session, we will hear from Kimberly Lucas, Director of the Pittsburgh Department of Mobility and Infrastructure, about how Pittsburgh's experience in planning and implementing the first mobility as a system service has worked out in the US. Afterward, we will hear from Pedro Fernandez, Head of International Mobility Projects from Madrid, who reached out to me when he learned we would be doing this webinar, since Madrid has also implemented a MaaS platform. We're always happy to share with you more perspectives and experiences from cities so you get a broader idea of the possible solutions. Finally, we will close the session with a quick exercise that we will be working on throughout our mobility series, so you can consolidate your vision, reflect on overcoming challenges, and start thinking about replicating these solutions in your city. If you have any questions at any point during the presentation, feel free to add them in the Q&A box. We will also be glad to hear your question. So if you would like to speak, please raise your hand and my colleague Callum, who is helping us run this webinar, will enable your microphone. As a reminder, this session is being recorded and it will be available to all attendees. So without further ado, I would like to introduce Ana Guayarte, IURC Program Manager at the EU Delegation in Canada. Ana.
Thank you very much, Susana. As Susana said, I'm here today representing the European Union that is supporting this great program, the International Urban and Regional Cooperation for North America. The European Union is supporting this action in the context of the implementation of the United Nations Urban Agenda and the European Union Urban Agenda as well, promoting city-to-city cooperation to jointly tackle the very important challenges that we are all facing today to make cities more sustainable, more livable, and more enjoyable for the citizens. IURC support study visits, network events, and the webinars for all the participant cities. The webinars are open to the public and are structured around different topics. Today, as Susana was saying, we start the first of a series of webinars on sustainable urban mobility and transport. Specifically today, we will be hearing about mobility as a service. I would really like to thank the city of Pittsburgh and Madrid for providing these master classes, or other cities that are here with us today that will also provide some insights from their own experiences, and all the participants in general. Please do not be shy. Share with us the more you can, because the more you share, the more we learn. And of course, thank you very much to the IURC team that makes all this possible. I will stop here, wishing you a very good and fruitful webinar. And Susana, over to you.
Thank you so much, Ana. That was a great opening. Thanks for encouraging our cities. As you mentioned, we would love to hear from you. So also, if you have any other experiences that you would like to share around sustainable urban mobility, please let us know and we can plan a session for you to share with other cities. And so now I'll give the floor to our keynote speaker, Kim.
Thank you. And I'll share my screen, but I have one quick note. Ana, you're in Ottawa, right? When I worked for Washington, D.C. managing Capital Bike Share a number of years ago, there was an industry holdup where you couldn't buy bike share bikes or stations. And we actually bought all of Ottawa's old equipment and launched it in Washington, D.C. And we lucked out because your bikes were the same color red as our bikes. And we covered up Capital with capital. And it was just a fun thing that, you know, in this industry of micromobility, you sometimes have to do very scrappy things to make sure your systems can keep running. So with that, can you all see my screen?
Yes.
Great. So as you heard, my name is Kim Lucas. I am the director for the City of Pittsburgh's Department of Mobility and Infrastructure. And today I'm going to talk about our Move PGH program, which is our mobility as a service offering here in the city of Pittsburgh. I realize now that given the international audience, I should have started with sort of a map of where Pittsburgh is. We are within the state of Pennsylvania in the southwest corner of that state, very close to Ohio and West Virginia. So the opposite end of the state of Philadelphia, which a lot of people sometimes confuse Pittsburgh and Philadelphia. So Move PGH, what do we mean by mobility as a service? Well, in Pittsburgh, what we mean is bringing together shared services like public transit, shared bikes, and shared scooters into physical locations where they're co-located, called mobility hubs, so that it's easy to transfer between them, and into the same digital location via the transit app, so that it's easy to get trip planning, wayfinding, and payment for those services in one place. It's all about making it easy for people to get around without their cars. To date, we have seen some amazing results. We believe that because of our Move PGH offering, that over 300,000 vehicle miles were not traveled because people were able to easily access cars and bikes and transfer between them with public transit. We've seen millions of tickets sold via the transit app for public transit. I think it's the highest way that people access digital fare payment for the public transit system is via the transit app. And we have found that our users, especially of our micromobility, so of our bikes and our scooters in Pittsburgh, are actually more likely to be low income. They're more likely to not own a car, and they're more likely to rely on transit, and specifically our transit app. So we found that not only are we providing a really valuable service and experience for our residents, but that we're especially able to provide that service to our most vulnerable residents who have less access to mobility. So how did we get here? Well, in 2019, the city of Pittsburgh, and specifically this department, said, we need a solution. We saw what was happening in other cities where in the District of Columbia, where I came from, we had something like 10 different thoughtless bike and scooter providers, in addition to the municipal owned bike share system, in addition to multiple bus providers. And there were different apps for every single one of those. So the city said, hey, we want to make sure that our residents and visitors have access to micromobility, but we want it to be really organized and easy for them by bringing folks together into one app. And we also need to make it easy for the city to manage, because for a very small staff, it would be really difficult to manage 10 different operators on our city streets. And so in spring of that year, the city issued a request for proposal. That's our procurement mechanism, where we officially go out and we put on the streets and say, hey, anybody who thinks that you can meet the requirements of this proposal, of this request rather, please give us a proposal and we'll evaluate them. And by doing that, I think we were probably the first city to use a procurement mechanism to bring together all of these different service providers. We didn't want to operate the services. We just said, hey, industry, we want you to come together with a unified solution and come to us so it's easy for us to operate or to manage, and it's easy for the user to benefit from. And in 2019, we selected the Pittsburgh Mobility Collective. And it took a couple of years, you'll see here, until July of 2021 for us to eventually launch that program. So I know there's a lot of text on some of these slides, but I thought it was important to show that the initial members in 2019 have changed from who the members are today in 2023. Even in a controlled environment where we have exclusive agreements with one scooter operator, and there's one bike share program, we've seen rebranding of that bike share. They've launched new equipment. The transit system has rebranded and changed its name. When we started, there was a moped system called Scooby that has since just left the marketplace. And Waze Carpool has not proven to be a reliable, useful partner of this particular program. And so I wanted to highlight that even in our small system, there's been a lot of changes, and that's presented some challenges over the last couple of years of operations, but we've made it through. And as you can see today, we still have Spin providing scooters, Zipcar providing car sharing. We've got Pittsburgh Regional Transit, which is our bus and rail system. And Pogo is the new branding for the bike share system that's station-based. And when they relaunched last year, they launched with a 50% electric fleet, which is really important with the topography of Pittsburgh. So mobility hubs, I mentioned that mobility as a service is bringing together a bunch of shared service providers in physical locations and a digital location. So the physical locations are called mobility hubs. Mobility hubs in Pittsburgh can be a number of different things. It basically means when you've got two or more of those shared service providers co-located so that it's easy for a user to transfer between them. For example, this is a picture of a Swift Mile charging station for scooters that's across the street from an entrance point to our light rail system. And so we call that a mobility hub. We have some money in the pipeline to do even more robust mobility hubs with even more features for our customers. But for now, it means co-locating different equipment. For specifically scooter users, if they park at one of our scooter stations, then they receive a $1 discount from Spin. So that's a financial incentive that's built in to encourage people to use the mobility hubs, because that means more organization of our city streets. And it means a more predictable experience for the next person who's looking for a scooter. These stations have advertising on them and also really great information about the services that are offered as part of Move PGH. And something that is really unique at the city of Pittsburgh and what enabled us to launch 25 of these stations very quickly is that we were able to plug into our city streetlight system. And so instead of having to do substantial underground hardwiring of electricity, we were able to leverage an asset that already existed and plug right in. And that made it more affordable for us. The transit app. So this is our unified digital location where today you can buy transit tickets and you can rent bike share bikes. One of the limitations is that even though in 2019, when transit was a partner of the PMC and still is, but when they originally brought this proposal to us, they anticipated having all of those services deeply integrated into their app, where you'd be able to rent a car share car, you'd be able to rent a scooter. Unfortunately, their business model has changed in part due to COVID impacts on ridership in different systems. So we've not gotten to that deep integration that we had hoped to see, but it is there for bikes and it is there for transit. And that's a big win for our residents. So equity. So this is an international audience. I'm sure most places have similar issues where historically in the United States, in our cities, not all communities receive the same amount of investment from the government in infrastructure, in programs, in environmental impacts. And so we want to make sure that today with our investments and in our programs that we're serving those communities that have been harmed in the past. One of the ways that we do this is by prioritizing the deployment of mobility hubs of this technology in communities that are not as easily accessible to public transit. You know, those communities that you could walk to a T station, but it's just a little too far. We want to make sure that it's served well by scooters by making Spin deploy their scooters there. In terms of affordability, scooters are not the cheapest way to get around town. They're, you pay by the minute, but we have programs where if you qualify for other financial aid programs, you can get a built-in discount with Spin. And something that I think we might have been the first city to do is just by starting a scooter trip in one of these pre-identified communities of concern, you unlock a discount. So instead of having to sign up for a program or proving through documentation that you have a low income, just by being in one of our communities that we believe is underserved, you get 25% off your scooter trip. And that is something that we call our access zones. And that is something that I think we were the first to have in Pittsburgh. For the bike share system, there, as you can see here, for $10 a year for folks who qualify, they can get unlimited bike share trips. And so different providers are offering different affordability components. And the city's role is by requiring deployment in certain communities and also really emphasizing that the providers need to provide these sorts of affordability components. Guaranteed basic mobility. So this is our research project that we're undertaking with Carnegie Mellon University, where we are doing a one-year pilot, recruiting individuals with low income and giving them basically all you can eat free access to public transit, bikes, scooters, and a big chunk of change on a monthly basis to rent car share cars. We hope to prove that when you break down the financial barrier to mobility, and we've already broken down the accessibility to mobility by making it easier to use those systems because of the transit app and mobility hubs, that you will achieve greater economic outcomes as an individual. And so we're going through an actual empirical research project. We went through the IRB approval process to work with human subjects, And right now we're recruiting for this program because we hope that we will be able to influence policy with the outcomes of this project. So here's a slide with some of the challenges. I like to participate in real talk. I have colleagues who will say there's conference speak where you talk about all the successes of a program, but I think it's really important for cities to know that it's not perfect. We're not exactly where we want it to be today. Mobility hubs. So I mentioned that we have 25 mobility hubs citywide. We wanted to have 50, we wanted to have 50 of them citywide, but the streetlight connections ended up working really well at the beginning, but we've kind of run out of city streetlights to plug into, and we need to rely on a utility provider to let us plug into their network. And so far they've said no. And so we haven't expanded as far as we want. I mentioned already that we had a lot of transition in our providers of these shared services. Our moped provider that we thought was quite successful in Pittsburgh exited the market, even though they were an exclusive provider and they were getting advertising through us and access to people through our program, they exited the market. Scooter legislation. So I referenced earlier that the RFP for this went out in 2019. We did not launch until 2021, in part, actually entirely because in the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania, so the state of Pennsylvania, electric scooters are not street legal, except for part of this 2-year pilot in my city. So we had to wait for the state to say that it was okay and legal for one of our shared services to even operate on our city streets. And that's just, I think we're one of the last states in the union to not have a statewide authorization for e-scooters. And we're working now through that process because July of this year, that 2-year pilot ends. And as of now, so does the legality of e-scooters on our streets. And so we're working with the state legislature in the hopes that that will be continued. And then the mobility wallet. So as I mentioned, we wanted and envisioned and had an agreement, in 2019 from Transit app, that this app would have a deep integration for all those services, that you'd be able to rent a bike, rent a scooter, get on a bus, and all just pay through your app. And that's not where we're at. And for what we've heard from Transit is that's not where they're going either. And so as we end our pilot this year, we have to do some soul searching and we have to figure out, are we going to stay with Transit app? Do we need to issue another request for proposals to get a provider in here that can work with all of the vendors and get us to that streamlined solution? What are the pros and cons of those? Part of the way that we're answering those questions is right now we're working on a shared mobility report that will evaluate the success of our 2-year pilot and also make recommendations for the future of shared services within our city. And we just, I think, awarded the contract for that and hope to have the first report back in May. And with that, that was the high-level overview of mobility as a service. So I don't know if I'm taking questions now or if you all want me to wait until after the next presenter is able to go.
No, that was great, Kim. Thank you so much for giving us overview. And I don't know if the audience has any questions. Remember, you can add your question in the chat or you can raise your hand. I see cities here: Almeria, Katowice in Poland, San Diego, Braga, Portugal, Windsor. We had our last event around sustainable urban mobility and transport in Zaragoza. And it was great to hear from all of the initiatives you have in your cities. And we heard over and over that MaaS was a priority. So I wonder if anyone here would like to learn more about any of these specific aspects of what Pittsburgh has been implementing. If you don't, I have actually several questions for Kim. Okay, yes, so Alisa, it's always great to have you. She's asking, Alisa, do you actually want to say your question out loud? We can give you, we can enable your microphone. Yes, perfect.
All right, you can hear me now. Excellent. Good morning, everybody. Good afternoon, good evening. Pedro, good to see you. Kimberly, that was excellent. So bike, e-bike, well, bike share has been difficult in many of our cities, and we're probably similar. Actually, I know I've been to Pittsburgh. We are similar to Pittsburgh in having those lower lying areas, and then you come up to the mesas for us. I was really intrigued when you talked about that e-bikes made the difference for your bike share, your docked bike share. Can you speak a little bit more about how maybe the locations mattered more, and what you did that was different from the first deployment that could be useful for another city like us to replicate?
Yeah, I can speak a little bit to it. So our bike share is not a municipal system. It's operated by a nonprofit. Previously, they were called Healthy Ride. Now they're called Pogo. So I only know so much about it, but I can say that we facilitate this by using as a city, our access to federal funds via congestion mitigation and air quality. We actually spend a lot of money on that equipment that we then turn over to them to operate. So what I know about their relaunch is it's completely new technology. They used to have Nextbike, which I think is a maybe German company. And they were one of the only Nextbike systems, if not the only operating in the United States. So they knew they were coming to a cliff where that just technology was not going to be supported. And they needed to make a transition anyway, in addition to wanting to operate e-bikes. When they relaunched, they shrank up their footprint, much to my chagrin. So they do not have as many stations as they once had, and they had to be really strategic with where they were putting those stations so that they were still serving the communities that needed it the most. Unfortunately, their footprint when they were larger was not big enough. We need vastly more bike share stations citywide. But they did go from a station-based system to a station-based system. So that hasn't changed that much. And I don't believe that the stations are charging the bikes. So from a technology standpoint, they also, I don't think, had to hardwire stations either. So I think what they did is they took a look at where they had been already operating. They looked at the performance of those stations, and then they chose, I believe, the most impactful locations from their previous operations to prioritize for the new launch.
Thank you.
Thanks, Kim. I saw Laura had her hand raised, not anymore, so I'm not sure if the question is still there or was answered already. If not, we have a question from Megan. Megan, would you like to say your question out loud, or should I read it? If you want to speak, raise your hand and Callum will allow your microphone. Okay. I will read it. When you explain there is difficulty with payment or app integration to improve the user experience, is this just typically with everyone's payment process or with low-income subsidized users? And what are the challenges with each subset of users?
So specifically, I'm referring to the technological barriers to integrating the payment systems that for example, that Spin uses, versus the payment system that Transit app is able to integrate into their app. And so my understanding is that it would take a lot of engineering to get the Spin mechanisms. And it's partially, the whiz bang stuff to get the systems to talk to each other. And it's partially the type of requirements that Spin has. For example, uploading your ID. That's not something that is being required for Transit, or I believe even for bike share. And so a little bit was the investment that needed to be made on just programming it so that they could talk. And the other was really the challenges presented by the different requirements that the different systems had. So unfortunately, I'm not a tech person per se, and I'm not super satisfied with the response we got. And I think ultimately that it's because of the transitioning business model of the Transit app. They serve billions of transit trips. They don't think that the market's there to integrate scooters, unfortunately. And mobility as a service is not really their bread and butter anymore. They care about people getting to buses and trains and facilitating that. And so I think that's more of the barrier than any of the technological limitations. For the specifically making sure that people that are low income or specifically unbanked are able to use a digital payment system. You're right, that is a challenge. In some other cities like Los Angeles, I believe they're working with a debit card, where instead of doing what we're doing, where on the back end we're paying basically people's accounts in their Transit app with our grant money. Other places are doing it by just giving people a debit card specifically for mobility. And so those are the ways that I know that some places are working around that challenge, but it can be a challenge, you know, cash and privacy and anonymity in using mobility is a big deal. And it's something that we don't think about too often when we're talking about transitioning to an entirely digital network, let alone like phones that die, phones that get stolen. You know, you don't want to totally stop somebody from being able to access mobility because like their mini computer just wasn't working that day. And so as an industry, we're constantly striving to find ways to break down those barriers. My vision is that we just don't pay to ride transit anymore, you know, and then if you want to rent a bike or a scooter, you're not paying because it's such a good thing that you're doing for our community by not driving that we should find other ways to pay for it and shouldn't come out of the user's pocket.
Yeah, absolutely, Kimberly. We agree with you. I see that Laura has her hand raised. Callum, can we allow her to speak? Thank you.
Good morning. Thanks, guys, for the presentation and allowing me to ask my question. So I'm in the Parks Department now at City of Windsor, and I guess my question is, do you have any examples or tips or ideas about how to integrate this into your parklands, or is it mainly within your right-of-way?
Yeah, so I think that's an interesting question. So our permit pertains to our right-of-way, and there's sometimes stickiness in different cities about whether or not e-bikes and e-scooters are allowed on trails. When I was in the District of Columbia, there was a lot of land that was controlled by the National Park Service, so it wasn't city property that we had any purview over anyway. And so geofencing and prohibiting was usually more of the conversation than integrating into parks. It was more about how do we make sure that people aren't using this system on land that we don't have any purview over giving them permission to use. I think integrating is a lot easier. That's where you look at where your trail network is, where are there physical places that people might want to ride, recognizing and encouraging it, because sometimes people will first ride bikes for recreation or a scooter for recreation. And then they're like, oh, why don't I take it to the grocery store? Why don't I take it to the library? Why don't I take it to the bus? And so I actually think it is really important to give access to these services, even for recreation, at least to begin with, because that's how you get people into not driving for transportation trips too. So I would say, you know, working with the partners, if the people who are permitting the system don't actually have purview over the parks, and making sure it's explicitly understood where they can be used, integrating that information into your maps, into your apps, using geofencing as appropriate to make sure that the devices are not being used where they shouldn't be used. And to the extent that you're encouraging it in your marketing, you know, we've worked with the Phipps Botanic Gardens here, so not quite the same, but it is like a natural destination. And they worked on giving people discounts if they get to the gardens by bike instead of by driving. And so through transportation demand management and working with destinations to make sure that you're encouraging these other modes, you're letting people have the information in addition to actually placing the assets there, putting a bike share station, putting a transit stop in your park.
Thanks, Kim.
Thank you. That helps a lot.
And just to mention, because here my team is telling me I'm not saying the cities there, and I'm mentioning the name of the city that's asking. So Alisa Muto is from San Diego and Laura Ash is from Windsor. And now we have another question from Deborah Lightman from Ottawa. Deborah, do you want to say it out loud, or should I read your question? Okay, perfect. So Kim, can you provide a link or info on how you defined your access zones? I see info on your equity index online, but I don't see the zones defined.
Sure, and I'm like literally searching my email to see if I can find the specific data that went into it. So yeah, so this was, let's see. We looked at our block group level equity analysis as the final mapping and identified, and we use that to identify new geographies. So we look at the standard stuff like income, we've looked at things like access to public transit. And so that in my presentation, I mentioned PRT's equity analysis. So we actually look at the transits map of where they say there are pockets of people that don't have good access to public transportation. We've looked at things like renting versus home ownership to identify communities of concern, and access to an automobile. And so we've used kind of that standard litany of data to identify underserved communities. And I think what's the access to transit is probably the thing that distinguishes it a little bit from the other equity data that you might look at, that like income, race, things like that.
And the other question is also from Deborah, is if your transit agency was enthusiastic or hesitant about e-ticketing on the transit app.
So I think they're enthusiastic, and I think that they were already doing e-ticketing before we brought it all together and brought in these other services. So I think one of my slides showed that something like 75% of their tickets are getting sold this way. And so it has been a big success. Now their sort of enthusiasm for the program has been a little different. A lot of times transit systems are concerned that if you're increasing access to other ways to move around, that those are going to be people that you're taking off of the bus or taking off of the train. And so by really trying to demonstrate that, no, we're actually increasing access to your service because look, people who lived a little too far from your train station now have scooters to get to it. And look, we can show you that scooter trips are ending right outside the train station. So people are using it to get to transit. And so that's definitely been a sensitive relationship, and one that I hope in the future permutation of the program, we can see even more collaboration on. I mentioned that the city has our guaranteed basic mobility pilot that has 100 people. It's quite small, but it offers robust access to lots of different services. The county, so we're a city within a county. The county is offering a really big transit program where I think they're recruiting 14,000 people for discounted public transit. So their program is not going to include access to bikes and scooters and car share, but it's going to have vastly more people. And so we're really trying, to collaborate even more closely with these other local partners so that we're not duplicating efforts and so that we ultimately have an even better product.
Wonderful, Kim. And now a last question, and that's from our team. It has to do with the procurement process. So we saw that actually in the beginning, there were several providers that collectively applied to get this contract with the city, and now they have shifted. So how are you handling that procurement now that all those companies are changing all the time?
That's a great question. So usually, when you put out a request for proposals, you anticipate having a contract be the outcome of that. In this one example, we don't have a contract. So we have an operating agreement with e-scooters because that was the one company who was not already operating within the city. And we've got sort of, functional, I used to call them like friendship make-believe agreements because they're not legally binding documents, but we've got sort of operating understandings between us. So that's one nice thing about not having that formal contract, is that we haven't had to update any names. There's no payment that's happening. That's one thing I didn't know. We don't pay anything for this program. We're not paying any of these providers, other than I mentioned that we leverage congestion mitigation and air quality money to procure equipment for the bike share system, which predates this arrangement. And in fact, for every scooter trip that's taken, there's a certain amount of money that's going into an infrastructure fund that we then can use to support our infrastructure in the city. So that's another benefit about it not being a proper contract, is that we're not paying anybody. This was really just a mechanism to get the industry to come together and put it together a proper proposal. If we did have a contract, would our challenge about not meeting 50 stations, would we still have that? Maybe not. Would we have transit app telling us that they're not going to integrate scooters? Maybe not. If I had a proper contract, maybe those things would not have happened. But given our limited resources as a city, this has worked out quite well for us.
And at the same time, I think it gives a very good idea of what would be needed in case another city wants to do a pilot, because often we assume that this would be extremely expensive, that there is a huge investment to be able to do that. And knowing that you're actually not paying for these to happen, it's unbelievable. Yeah.
It is. And, you know, Transit's business model had previously been a certain amount of money off of, I think, every ticket sold or something through their app is how they made income. So I think we probably benefited from the fact that the transit system was already working with the transit app on it, because everything else was just sort of, you know, a plus, and it didn't have those extreme costs associated with it. I had one other note about, exclusivity. So while we're not paying Spin to operate scooters in our city, and I don't know really of any city that is paying for scooters to operate, we are benefiting them by having them be our exclusive operator. And so that is something that I've heard from the industry, that especially with micromobility, which is very unstable, that if you can offer exclusivity, they will invest in your city, and they will invest in better, you know, stations and operations and things like that, because there's a certain amount of guarantee about their, you know, continued service. Now, where we are now is that our pilot ends in July. And right now, scooters will not be legal past July. So, you know, we think that's going to change, but there is uncertainty right now for everybody, unfortunately.
Thank you so much, Kim, for your presentation and answering the questions. And I would like to move now with Pedro. He will be talking about the MaaS system in Madrid. Pedro.
I have my mic mute. Good afternoon, everybody. Good morning from the US, especially to our colleagues from San Diego. And thank you, Susana, for this great opportunity that you're giving us to share our experiences with the mobility as a service that is being more and more important in our cities. So I'm going to try to share my screen, and let's see how it works. Let me try again, just 1 second. I think that is going to work. Will you check? Will you confirm, Susana?
Yes,
that...
it's working great.
Okay, well, happy to see that. The thing is, I've lost the screen here. Okay, I'm using multiple screens, so sometimes I get lost through my screens. Well, as you all know, my name is Pedro Fernandez. I'm working as a head of department. Sometimes it's translated into project manager, mostly about international projects that we're dealing at the city council, especially all related with mobility, sustainability, and sometimes air quality, and dealing with our colleagues from the department. Well, just to give a short view of the city, we are the capital of Spain with 3.3 million people. We will say that we were the third, but now we are the second most populated urban area, because we had the Brexit, so we just been the second. We have an extremely important airport in Southern Europe, and we belong to 2 TEN-T corridors, which give us also a lot of work. We are at the center of the peninsula, Iberian Peninsula, between the cities of Lisbon and Barcelona. And let me show you the 2 icons that the one telling Madrid is the icon, the logo, I would say, of the Madrid City Council, where I'm working, and the EMT logo, which is our public transport company. It is 100% owned by our city council, but it works as a different company. But of course, our relation is more, I would say, more than direct. So our strategy is perfectly aligned with the strategy of EMT, and the objectives, of course, are the same. Well, I have made this presentation as a mobility as a service that is based on these 7 principles, and that is where we're working, or not only in the city council, but also at EMT. And the thing is that for the first time, we have an app, as our colleague from our colleague from the city of Pittsburgh was telling, is focused on making life easier, happier for the citizen, not only those people living here, but also people visiting Madrid. And as you all know, we are one of the most visited cities in not only in Europe, but also in the world. And this was a big problem that people will face different apps, different options, and in the end, they will just using Uber or just the single app of scooters that they will have from their hometown. So this is what is changing. Now we are making a big effort that tourists and anywhere else on the network, they know about this app and they can use it by all means in the city. This is something that is not only giving value to the citizen, but also the city and the different mobility operators involved. So we are giving in Madrid the opportunity to different operators, and not only by scooters, but also car sharing, and they all have to be zero emissions in the city of Madrid. And it is also giving an innovative ways for public-private collaboration. So this app was born from the city and the EMT perspective, that we needed to include all the different operators, which is also important. And the first thing that we were discussing is what would be needed to be. And this is also aligned with what our colleague from Pittsburgh was telling, and it must include mostly all the needs that you would have to make a daily movements, but also occasional movement, just to go every day to work, but also when you ever have to visit a friend or you have to go to the hospital. And this is something changing every day because of the traffic, air pollution, our different problems in the city, some cuts that could be made because of a demonstration. So that can be used anytime. So this is really the first app to provide multimodal route, and also giving occupancy awareness and suggesting alternative low occupancy routes, as I'm telling you here. And people need to trust that. It is important that we know that with the first apps, from the private sector, they were not trusted anymore when once or twice they were giving wrong information, because people need to use them. Everyone is not a tourist, so most of the times you are aware about the time it takes your trip. Also, we can consider that the integration of these multiple different applications and infrastructure is hard, it's slow, it's expensive. So that's why the private sector cannot handle with that, especially when in the city we have metro and we also have public buses with a public company. So it was needed to be from the public sector that we started to do something like that. And then everyone else is welcome, because the other way around wouldn't be possible, as we could see, since most of our offer in the city are coming from public offer. I'm giving you some details about how this is a big challenge for the city and the public transportation, because the needs of a strong proclamation and update and let somebody know day by day that some problems, error, mistakes that could be given. This is one of the needs that must be given trust to the users. So this is not something that starts as something that uses the first day, but the problem is that this is movement, mobility, any kind of service like that, every day is different in a city like this. So that is why digitalization, updating, and being aware of different problems that can arise must be every day in our strategy. So that's why all the stakeholders that are operating in the city not only are welcome, but also they are more than invited to be part of here. These are some of the questions that, Susana, we were facing that we can also, well, the question was in the app. Can you also enter your origin and destination and decide which would be the best way to commute? And yeah, of course, I'm giving you the answer here for those who want to have a deeper look at the presentation, because it's boring to read all that. But the answer is yes. All the needed and especially the need from the origin and destination can be tackled like that. You can also enter where you're living, where you're working, on any other route that you can be. Imagine you're going to a hospital every 15 days. You can have that in a fast way, and anywhere you are starting the trip, that can lead you to this destination. What was the most challenging aspect of launching the app in Madrid? This is a hard question, Susana and my colleagues, because everyone working with this, I would say, with this challenge, could answer a different thing. Because sometimes when you are working on that, you lose the idea that the user doesn't care about all that. They just want to be working. So the most challenging aspect is that it works every day. You know what? I was working in a previous app when I was working for the Regional Administration for Transport that some of you may know, Consorcio de Transportes, and our app was very good. But the thing is that we didn't have a contract to keep it updated. Of course, it was updating the routes, but whenever we changed a bus line, it was not possible because it was not thought that you can enter, for instance, a night line, or an express line, or a different university line that wouldn't work in summer. So for me, those ideas were in my head, that other colleagues who are supporting the application can handle different answers. So the answer we were giving you here, we have many. I would say there are two. One of them is trust. As lack of trust, I was telling you, is one of the things that people will take this app as something to uninstall and wouldn't care anymore about that. And the other thing is the technical side. So the engine, the integration, and the new technologies that could be coming must be thought that they can be integrated in an easy way, because this is really important. When you need to make a big update, you cannot leave the app and use for 24 hours or just a day, even on Sundays, because those days local people can be going to different place. So that's something to take into account, that whenever you need an update or change something, more than 2, 3, 4, 5 minutes, especially during the weekend or daylight, that could handle that. People just are about to use once and they wouldn't trust anymore. This sounds stupid, but this is important to keep this app alive. I mean, you wouldn't care if your WhatsApp is not working for 5 minutes, but those 5 minutes, when you need to go to a certain place and you're trusting this app, that can lead you to use again Uber or whatever the other app is there. And the third question, what was the process you undertook to plan and launch the app? For example, in the case of Pittsburgh, I created a working group with representatives of the companies that manage the bike scooters, so they could agree on how to move forward. That was the thing. So this is something we were doing more or less the same. And this process, we have been in touch with all the different stakeholders. Of course, everyone is invited to come to Madrid and to start an app or start working with us. So this is like an open table. And of course, when we were doing forcing groups, forcing the different apps to share the information. That is something important that sometimes you can handle with this problem, that some private initiatives don't want to share all the data because they are in a public concurrency. But that's the only way to lead success, that you can trust different operators. Of course, we would like to have more, and of course, we would like to have more integration, even with the taxis, that we still don't have them, because I think sometimes you can use it. It's always easy to raise your hand and find a taxi, but the thing is that you can also compare that. The thing is that to access the data of the taxis, we need to change all the technology, because we don't even know, we cannot even know where all the taxis in the city are. We are not allowed to know them. So we will just start by the 15,000 taxis we have in the city, starting to tell them that they should give us the information where they are. So this is something that I will just add as information. Just we are in trust among different cities, that could be important to add. But the new technologies like scooters, biking, car sharing, that's really easy because we always know each unit where it is. And sharing that information, it was at first a problem. But if we agree that they would, that no one else except the public system would know where they are, then the other would agree. Because it is important that imagine scooter company number 1 and scooter company number 2, they don't want to share the information, but it's just as easy as you can download the app, register, and then you will start to know where all the scooters of your concurrency of your competition are. So it's not something that you don't need to give the information. So these things are taking time, but more and more people agree that they have to be shared. Well, let's have a deeper view on the app. This is what the information is given in Spanish, and you can change it to English. But the 4 things more important are about the bus, public transport. They give you the occupation. It was very important at the COVID time, but still some people are afraid to be in a full bus, and they can see if they have a different option in the next bus or in a different line, or just to use the metro. You can always, from the second image, plan your route. That is very easy, and it's everywhere more or less the same idea. So we made it like it would be like Google Maps, as easy as that. The third thing is that you can pay the ticket bus, and you can validate through a QR code. That would be easy, and it has an advantage I will tell you later. And for the fourth thing, which is the thing is that the BiciMap, which is the public biking system, that you can also use it directly with this app. So you don't even need to have the BiciMap app. This is an idea how you can plan a distance from Puerta del Sol to Velázquez, and it is more or less the idea for Google Maps or any other app. So we don't want to make a different thing that anyone who is just installing this app in less than 4 seconds can easily understand. If they can go quick or economic, or I would say less pollutant, and then you can compare these ideas. You can always see at what time you're leaving, Saturday to November 21, 15, whatever, anytime. And then you can have the different perspective when you're using the bus, or if you want to use the biking system, you want to use the metro. And this is, as you can see, this is on the right side, the bus. On the left side, you have the Acciona motorbike system, which are 100% electric, as I told you. And as you can see, even in this app, they are giving you the information about the 54% of the battery. It is giving you the information how many helmets you have. Some motorbikes have 1, some of them have 2. And also with the BiciMap, with the biking system, which is the closest place to take them, how many bags are for free. So with this glance, you can be in the street and decide, okay, I want to arrive just faster or easier, quicker, whatever is that. But the thing that we were working happily with this is the quality of air. You can see the information of ozone, CO, NO2 at real time with our different points of measurement in the city. And this is about the last thing I wanted to tell you about the payment for the bike parking, for even the parking lots of car sharing, and also for the Transbus. We still have in Madrid something that we need to change. I agree on that. Oops, sorry. If you change the bus, you need to pay again. But with this app, you can be changing bus anytime for 60 minutes. That's something new because our system in the city, every time you take a different unit, you have to pay unless you have a monthly or year transport card, but otherwise you would have to be paying twice. So with these new apps and the QR, they give you time to change from one bus to another for 60 minutes, which is something that is changing a bit the use of the buses. Well, that was everything. I know I was a bit quick, but I needed to be attached to the time. Well, thank you for your attention, and thank you, Susana, for your opportunity.
No, thank you, Pedro. And it was very interesting to see also that you can manage your bike parking and your car parking, which is something that I hadn't seen before. And I think it kind of closes that circle for those coming from the suburbs or that doing longer rides. And it has been really interesting to hear from these two very different perspectives. It's something that we see over and over while working with the North American cities and the European cities. In North America, it's usually more of public-private partnerships, whereas in Europe, it's more led by public entities. And so we can see here how EMT has been the one developing this app in Madrid, whereas in Pittsburgh, it has been more of the transit app. So I think that we can hear from these two presentations, some pros and cons from each one. And I would love to hear from the audience, what do you think? And if you prefer one approach over the other. We don't have that much time left. So if you have any questions for Pedro, please add them to the Q&A box or to the chat, and we will make sure to send them to Pedro and then share with you all of the answers. Oh, actually, I see one from Claudia. Thank you, Claudia. And I'll ask Pedro after we finish our session, and we will make sure to share it with you. And we will now move to our interactive activity. And you will see throughout our different sessions that we will be building upon this activity and adding more. The IURC North America team is putting together a map to really help you understand what your vision is for mobility, sustainable urban mobility in your city. Then thinking about the barriers that you have, thinking then about the solutions to overcome those barriers, and finally, what specific mechanisms you can use to get there. So we will start with our vision, because in our conversation with Kim, we realized how important this was to drive all of the plans that they have been doing. And as Madrid just presented, having one vision like Madrid 360 is important to align your projects and make sure that they are really complementing each other. And we have been working with you guys for a long time, and we have realized that thinking about mobility or transport projects in isolation really doesn't work. We have to think around them as an overall plan. And I think that MaaS is a very good result of that. So I'm going to be sharing now my screen, and Callum will be sharing the link in the chat so that we can start asking you about your vision. One second, here we go. So you can either use your browser, menti.com, and enter the code, or you can scan the code with your phone and participate from your phone. And so the first question would be, what is your city's sustainable urban mobility and transport vision? So we want to hear from all of the cities in the audience, Ottawa, San Diego, Almeria, everyone, and so that we can start mapping out what you're trying to accomplish. I'm giving you a few seconds here. Maybe you're writing something that's long. More safe and sustainable mobility options that are accessible to all. Very good. And here we're touching again on that equity piece, which was very important to hear about in Pittsburgh. To reduce greenhouse gas emissions from the transportation sector and create a better quality of life for San Diegans. And that's really important as well. We hear over and over how we're trying to go towards zero emissions, and that has been kind of driving all of the things that we have been working on around sustainable urban mobility. But then we also complement that with creating a better quality of life, which means economic opportunities, health opportunities, etc. Then everyone can easily access the destinations they need to get to without owning or driving a car. So important, we're trying to take people out of private cars. And we have fast and accessible transport based on railway. I love that. So having more railways in our cities. I'm not the expert in the city about it, but I can say it's to get the most comfortable city for the community, using ICT solutions and reducing emissions, energy, and noise. So important, energy efficiency, noise reduction, very important for your health as well. So that's all for today. Thank you so much for attending our session and for exchanging this knowledge and these experiences that you've had. Please make sure to send your questions to us in case you have another one for Kim or for Pedro. And your feedback is very important to us. So please click the link in the chat or in your Mentimeter and answer the survey as we really consider all of the feedback that you have been sending us. Thank you so much, Kim and Pedro, for presenting today. It was great hearing from you, both your experiences. Thanks and have a great day.
Thank you, everybody. Bye-bye.
Bye.